Nick, why did you sell my car without even asking me? I asked, gripping the edge of the countertop in our brightly lit kitchen. My voice trembled with frustration as I stared at him. He was lounging on the couch, scrolling on his phone, barely glancing up. I told you last week we needed the money, Nick replied casually, his tone flat and uninterested. For what? I demanded, my voice rising. My patience was hanging by a thread. For the new entertainment system. The old one was outdated, and we deserved an upgrade, he said with a shrug, his eyes still glued to his phone. I felt a wave of anger and disbelief. That car wasn't just about the money, Nick. It was mine. It meant something to me, I said, my voice cracking as I fought to stay calm. I took a deep breath, remembering my grandmother's advice to keep my inheritance private. I never thought I'd have to follow it so strictly. Nick finally looked up, his face a mix of irritation and indifference. Come on, Justine, it's just a car. We can get you another one later. Shaking my head, I felt my frustration boiling over. It's not just about the car, Nick. It's about respect. You didn't even bother to ask me. You can't keep making decisions like this without considering me. Our usually peaceful suburban home now felt suffocating. Outside, kids played in their yards, and neighbors chatted over fences. To everyone else, we looked like a happy couple in a close-knit neighborhood. But inside, the cracks in our relationship were growing deeper by the day. Nick finally put his phone down and walked toward me. You're overreacting, Justine. We're not broke. I'll buy you another car. End of discussion. His dismissive tone cut through me like a knife. I stared at him, searching for the man I had married. The one who used to be caring and thoughtful. All I saw now was someone I barely recognized, someone draining me of patience and trust. End of discussion? I repeated, my voice filled with disbelief. You can't just decide how this goes, Nick. You've crossed a line, and you don't even realize it. Nick's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing. What's really going on, Justine? You've been distant for months. Is there something you're not telling me? I took a step back as the truth hit me. My grandmother's words rang in my head louder than ever. Now I finally understood why she had always told me to protect my inheritance. It wasn't just about the money, it was about keeping control of something that was truly mine, especially when everything else in my life felt like it was slipping away. I don't know, Nick, I said quietly, my voice trembling. Maybe it's because you've stopped caring about what's important to me. Or maybe it's because you think you can just make all the decisions in this marriage without considering me. Nick scoffed and shook his head. You're being dramatic. I'm just trying to make our lives better. Our lives? I shot back. No. You're trying to improve your life at my expense. He didn't answer. Instead, he stared at me, his expression a mix of frustration and confusion. In that moment, I realized he truly didn't see the problem, or maybe he just didn't want to. Either way, I knew something had to change, and soon. As Nick turned back to his phone, dismissing our conversation like it was nothing, I felt a surge of determination. This wasn't over, not even close. I wasn't going to let him push me aside in my own life. My grandmother's advice had been a guiding light, and it was time I started paying attention to it. The tension in the room was suffocating as I walked out of the kitchen, my heart pounding in my chest. One thing was clear, I wasn't going to let Nick's betrayal define me. This was just the beginning. I had my own plans to make. I don't know what to do anymore, I said, collapsing onto Patricia's couch. The floral cushions smelled faintly of lilac, a comforting scent in the middle of my turmoil. Patricia looked up from her magazine, her face instantly filled with concern. Justine, what happened? Did Nick do something again? I sighed heavily, running my fingers through my hair. He sold my car. Without even asking me. Just traded it for some stupid entertainment system. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Seriously? Who sells someone's car without asking them? That's crazy. Exactly, I exclaimed. And then he acted like it wasn't a big deal, like I was the one overreacting. My voice shook as I told her about the argument earlier that morning. Talking about it only made the frustration bubble up again. Patricia's expression softened, her voice gentle but firm. Justine, he's been doing stuff like this for a while now, hasn't he? I nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in my throat. It didn't start out like this. When we first got together, he was so kind, so thoughtful. I felt like the luckiest person in the world. I was the center of his world once. But now, I let the thought trail off, unable to finish. Patricia gave my hand a gentle squeeze, her voice soft but firm. Have you thought about leaving him? You don't have to stay in a situation like this, Justine. I bit my lip, hesitating. I have, but it's not that simple. We've built a life together. It's not easy to just walk away. Patricia's face filled with concern. You have to do what's best for you. Don't forget that. Later that evening, as I stood at the sink washing the dinner dishes Nick had left behind, my mind wandered to the early days of our relationship. I remembered picnics in the park, surprise weekend trips, and how he used to plan everything so perfectly. He made every moment feel special. That version of Nick felt like a distant memory, replaced by someone who cared more about gadgets and parties than me. As I scrubbed the last pot, my eyes landed on the shiny new entertainment system that now dominated the living room. A bitter taste filled my mouth. I grabbed my phone and started scrolling through Nick's social media. My heart sank as I saw photo after photo of lavish parties, extravagant spending, and friends I barely knew. The realization hit me hard. This is where the money for my car had gone. I clenched my jaw, anger bubbling inside. I decided I'd confront him again as soon as he got home. The sound of the door creaking open pulled me from my thoughts. Nick stumbled in, reeking of alcohol. Where have you been? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. He laughed, swaying slightly. Out with the guys. Needed a break, you know. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay composed. I saw the photos. All those expensive gadgets, all those parties. Is that where the money from my car went? Nick looked at me, his eyes glassy and unfocused. Oh, come on, Justine. Don't start this again. It's just stuff. We're having fun. Fun? Without considering my feelings? I snapped. This isn't just about the money, Nick. It's about respect. You've ignored everything I care about. He rolled his eyes and slumped onto the couch. Why don't you ever chill out? You used to be fun. Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. This isn't about fun, Nick. It's about you taking everything that matters to me and treating it like it's nothing. Nick didn't answer. His eyes were already closing, and within moments, he was snoring on the couch. The sound filled the room, but it couldn't drown out the anger and pain growing inside me. I stood there for a moment, staring at the man who once promised to love and cherish me. Patricia's words echoed in my mind. Maybe it was time. Time to make a change. Time to find the strength my grandmother always believed I had. This betrayal wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new. I was ready to fight for the life I deserved. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold beside me, my phone in hand. I needed to talk to someone who would understand my mom. Taking a deep breath, I dialed her number. Justine, sweetheart, how are you? She answered, her warm, comforting voice almost breaking the wall of strength I was trying to hold up. Mom, things with Nick, they're worse than ever, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Oh, honey, what happened? She asked, her tone instantly filled with concern. I explained everything. The car, the way Nick had been treating me, and his complete disregard for my feelings. Mom, I'm considering divorce. I can't keep living like this, I admitted, the words heavy but somehow freeing. There was a pause on the line. Then her voice came back, steady and full of reassurance. Justine, we've always supported you no matter what. Your father and I will help you through this. And don't forget, you have your inheritance. I know, Mom, I said softly. I think I might need to use it to move out and start fresh. Do whatever you need to do, darling, she said firmly. We're here for you. As I hung up the phone, I felt a small wave of relief. Saying it out loud made it real, and it gave me a sense of purpose. I opened my laptop and started drafting an email to a lawyer, asking for advice on the next steps for divorce. Then, I searched for apartments in a nearby town. Each click, each decision, felt like a step toward reclaiming my life. By the time I closed my laptop hours later, I felt more determined than I had in years. That evening, I sat on the couch, my phone close by as I waited for a reply from the lawyer. Nick walked into the room, his expression tense, his eyes scanning me suspiciously. "What have you been doing all day?" he asked, his tone sharp and accusatory. "Just sorting some things out," I replied, keeping my voice calm and my answers vague. Nick's eyes darted to my phone. "Who were you talking to earlier?" "My mom," I said, avoiding his gaze. I needed some advice. Before I could react, Nick lunged forward and snatched the phone from my hand. "What the hell, Nick? Give it back!" I yelled, reaching for it. He stepped back, scrolling through my messages. His face darkened as his eyes flicked over the screen. "Thinking about leaving me? Huh," he said, his voice laced with anger.
"Give me my phone, Nick."
"Now," I demanded, my voice firm even as my heart pounded in my chest. Nick's eyes narrowed dangerously, and he stepped closer. "You think you can just run away with that little inheritance of yours? That money belongs to us, not just you. You've been hiding it from me this whole time." My mind raced, but I refused to back down. "I didn't have to tell you everything. That money was meant to give me security. You're going to use it to get away from me," he spat, his voice sharp and full of venom as he stepped even closer. I stood my ground, refusing to let him intimidate me. "Yes, Nick. If that's what it takes, I'm done." He threw the phone onto the couch, stepping back with a furious glare. "You won't get far with that money. You owe me, Justine. We're in this together." "No, Nick," I said, my voice calm but cold. "We were in this together. You're the one who changed that." Nick glared at me, his face twisted with anger, before storming out of the room and slamming the door behind him. My hands trembled, but beneath the fear, I felt something stronger: determination. This was it. I couldn't keep living like this. I had a plan, and I was going to see it through. A soft ding from my phone broke the silence. It was an email from the lawyer. I quickly opened it and read the advice carefully. Each word solidified my resolve.
It was time to take the next step.
I grabbed a small bag and packed only the essentials. Then I called Patricia. She picked up on the first ring. "Patricia," I said, my voice steady but urgent, "can I stay with you for a while? I'm leaving tonight." "Of course, Justine," she said without hesitation. "Come right over. We'll figure this out together." I zipped up the bag and took one last look around the house. Once it had been my sanctuary, but now it felt more like a prison. Without a second thought, I walked out the door and didn't look back. When I arrived at Patricia's house, my small suitcase still clutched in my hand, she opened the door before I could even knock. She pulled me into a tight hug. "You did the right thing, Justine," she whispered. "Thanks, Patricia," I said softly as I stepped inside. We sat down in her cozy living room. The warmth of her home was a stark contrast to the cold, tense environment I had just left behind. "So, what's the plan?" Patricia asked, handing me a cup of tea. "I contacted a lawyer," I said, taking a sip. "Tomorrow, I'll start looking for a new place and a job. I need to be independent emotionally and financially." Patricia nodded firmly. "You can stay here as long as you need to. We'll get through this together." The next morning, I woke up early, ready to start fresh. Patricia drove me around town, helping me search for apartments. After a few hours, we found a small, cozy one-bedroom place that felt perfect. I put down a deposit and scheduled a move-in date. It felt like a tiny victory. Later that afternoon, I sat at Patricia's kitchen table with my laptop, applying for jobs. The process was slow and tedious, but I knew it was necessary. By evening, I had already lined up several interviews. Patricia and I celebrated the small wins with a simple dinner, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. As we finished our meal, my phone rang. The screen lit up with Nick's name. My heart raced, but I forced myself to answer. "Justine, where are you?" His voice was harsh, almost shouting. "That's none of your business, Nick," I said firmly, keeping my tone steady despite the storm brewing on the other end. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Nick, I had no choice. You left me no other option. It is my business, Justine, he barked. We're married. You can't just walk out. I had to, I replied firmly. Nick scoffed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. You think you're so brave now, hiding at Patricia's? This is our problem, not hers. Tell me where you are. I'm not hiding, Nick, I said, my voice steady. And it's not just Patricia's problem. I'm done being treated like I don't matter. You owe me, Justine, he snapped. The mortgage, the bills, everything. You think you can just run off with your inheritance and leave me to handle everything on my own? This isn't about money, Nick. It's about respect, or your lack of it, I said, tears brimming in my eyes. You'll regret this, Justine, he hissed before hanging up. I lowered the phone, my hands trembling. Patricia was watching me, her face full of concern. He's not going to stop, is he? She asked softly. Not easily, I admitted, steeling myself. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Between getting my new apartment ready and going to job interviews, I felt stronger with each passing day. Every step I took away from Nick brought a little more peace. My confidence was growing, and for the first time in years, I started to believe I could build a life for myself. One evening, while unpacking boxes in my apartment, my phone buzzed with a message from Nick. I hesitated before opening it. You're making a huge mistake. You'll come crawling back. They always do. I stared at the screen, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. Taking a deep breath, I quickly typed back. No, Nick. I'm done crawling. This is my life now. With that, I hit send and blocked his number. Standing by the window, I watched the sun setting over my new neighborhood. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. The next morning, I woke up early and headed to my first job interview. Walking into the office, I was greeted by a warm, friendly receptionist who guided me through the process. The interview went smoothly, and I left feeling hopeful. When I returned to my apartment, Patricia was waiting for me with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. She grinned as she held them up. To new beginnings, she said, handing me a glass. To new beginnings, I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. As we sat together, talking and laughing, I realized I was starting to reclaim my life. Every small victory was a step away from Nick and the toxic hold he had over me. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about all the things I had left behind and all the possibilities waiting ahead of me. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face whatever came next. I felt like I was finally in control. A week later, I got the call offering me the job. As I listened, tears of joy rolled down my face. This was proof I was on the right path. I was building a new life, one step at a time, and this time, it was a life where I mattered. The town's annual fair was in full swing. Laughter filled the air as kids ran between booths, and the scent of popcorn and barbecue lingered in the breeze. I was helping Patricia set up her jewelry stall when I felt a tap on my shoulder. Justine, a familiar voice said. I turned to see Olivier, a mutual friend who had always been kind and dependable. Oh, hey, Olivier. How are you? I asked, managing a small smile. Pretty good, he replied, then hesitated. But I heard about you and Nick. Are you okay? I sighed, trying to keep my voice steady. It's been tough, but I'm getting through it. Olivier nodded, concern etched on his face. Then he hesitated again, his expression cautious. Speaking of Nick, he's here. And, well, he's not taking things well. Before I could ask what he meant, a loud commotion caught my attention. Nick was in the middle of the fairground, clearly drunk, shouting at a group of young men near a barbecue pit. Oh no, I whispered, my stomach twisting. Hey, it's none of your business, Nick yelled, shoving one of the men. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder as heads turned toward the scene. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I need to handle this. Are you sure? Patricia asked, worry in her eyes. I have to, I said, straightening my shoulders. I weaved through the crowd, ignoring the growing whispers. As I approached, Nick spotted me. He stumbled toward me, his words slurred. Justine, there you are. Thought you could avoid me forever. His breath reeked of alcohol, and his eyes were glassy. I forced myself to stay calm. "Nick, you're making a scene. Let's go somewhere else to talk." He laughed bitterly, his voice carrying over the crowd.
Why?
"So you can walk out on me again? You think you're so much better now." "Nick, you're drunk. This isn't the time or place," I said firmly. He ignored me, his voice growing louder. "Everyone should know how you abandoned your husband." His words cut through the fairground, and I could feel the stares of the crowd. Whispers spread like wildfire. Anger and embarrassment churned inside me, but I refused to let him pull me down. I kept my voice steady. "Nick, we're done.
You need to accept that.
Now please, go home before you make this worse." His expression twisted, wild and unhinged. "Worse? You think this can get worse? You owe me, Justine. You can't just walk away without paying your dues." "I don't owe you anything, Nick. I'm done being your pawn," I said firmly, stepping back as he moved closer. Before Nick could take another step, a friend of his grabbed his arm.
Come on, man.
"Let's get you out of here." Nick struggled against him, his furious eyes locked on mine. "You're going to regret this, Justine," he spat as they dragged him away. I let out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Patricia appeared beside me, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. "Yes," I replied, my voice trembling but steady. It had to be done. We went back to setting up her stall, the mood around us gradually returning to normal. Still, I caught a few sympathetic looks from people who had witnessed the scene. I ignored them, focusing on the task at hand. Hours passed, and the fair became a blur of faces and activity. By the end of the day, after packing everything up, I drove to my new apartment. Walking through the door, I felt a mix of exhaustion and relief. I was finally free of Nick's manipulation. The road ahead was uncertain, but I knew I had taken the first step toward a better life. Over the next few days, I settled into my new space, feeling the weight on my shoulders start to lift. One morning, I caught my reflection in the mirror and paused. There was a spark in my eyes, something I hadn't seen in years. This was my life, my space, and my chance to rebuild. The memory of Nick's public outbursts still lingered, but instead of pulling me down, it only fueled my resolve. I was moving forward, and nothing he did could stop me. As I stepped outside into the crisp morning air, I felt a newfound sense of purpose. Today was just another step, and step by step, I was reclaiming my future. A week after the fair, I was getting ready for my first day at my new job when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Olivier. "Justine, can we meet? There's something you need to know about Nick." My curiosity was piqued, so I agreed to meet him at the local coffee shop after work. The day flew by in a blur of training and meeting my new colleagues. By the evening, I was both exhausted and exhilarated as I headed to the coffee shop. Olivier was already there, waiting with 3 drinks. He waved me over, his expression serious. "Thanks for coming, Justine," he said, sliding one of the cups toward me. "No problem, Olivier. What's going on?" I asked, taking a sip. Olivier took a deep breath. Nick lost his job. The company downsized, and he was let go. I blinked, caught off guard. "What? I didn't know that," I said, surprised. "He hasn't contacted me since the fair." "Yeah, he's not handling it well," Olivier replied. "He's been telling people you left him at the worst possible time, trying to play the victim. But there's more." My heart raced as I leaned in. "What do you mean?" Olivier's expression turned serious. "He's planning something, Justine. He told a mutual friend he's going to try to win you back, just so he can get access to your inheritance." Anger flared inside me. "He really thinks he can manipulate me again?" Olivier nodded. "He's desperate, Justine. You need to be careful." "Thanks for the warning, Olivier," I said, my resolve hardening. "I'll stay vigilant." As I walked back to my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Nick losing his job had made him unpredictable. I unlocked my door and stepped inside, my mind spinning. I knew I needed to be ready for whatever scheme he might try. The next few days were busy as I settled into my new routine. Work kept me occupied, but the thought of Nick lingered in the back of my mind. One evening, as I was organizing my closet, a sudden knock at the door made me freeze. I hesitated, then looked through the peephole. It was Nick. "Justine, open up. We need to talk," he called, his voice shaky. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door just slightly, leaving the chain on. "What do you want, Nick?" He looked disheveled and stressed. "Justine, I'm sorry for everything. I've lost my job. I need your help." "You need my help?" I repeated, disbelief filling my voice. "After everything you've done?" "Please, Justine. We can work this out. Think about what we had," he pleaded, trying to sound sincere. "What we had is over, Nick," I said firmly. "You made sure of that." His demeanor shifted instantly, his eyes flashing with anger. "You can't leave me like this. You owe me." "I owe you nothing," I replied, slamming the door shut and locking it. Nick began pounding on the door, shouting, but I leaned against it, breathing deeply to calm myself. After a few minutes, the banging stopped, and I heard his footsteps retreat. I looked through the peephole to make sure he was gone before grabbing my phone and calling Patricia. "Justine, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "Nick showed up at my apartment," I explained, my voice shaking. "He's acting desperate and unhinged." "Stay calm, Justine. You need to protect yourself," Patricia said firmly. "Consider getting a restraining order. I'll look into it." "Thanks, Patricia," I said, feeling a little steadier after talking to her. The next morning, I called my lawyer to discuss my options. He advised me to document everything Nick did and start the process for a restraining order. Knowing I was taking steps to protect myself gave me a small sense of control, but I also knew I had to stay alert. This wasn't over yet. I followed the lawyer's advice, keeping a detailed log of every interaction with Nick. Days turned into weeks, and I poured my energy into building my new life. One afternoon, while taking a break at work, I glanced out the window and froze. Across the street, Nick was standing there, watching me. My heart raced, but I straightened my shoulders and reminded myself that this was my life now. No matter how desperate he became, I wasn't going back. This was my chance to reclaim my future, and I wouldn't let him take that away from me. When I left work later that day, Nick was sitting on a bench across the street. As soon as he saw me, he stood and started walking in my direction. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered under my breath, quickening my pace. I was determined to avoid him, but he caught up before I could reach the corner. "Justine, wait," he called, grabbing my arm. I yanked my arm free, anger bubbling inside me.
What do you want, Nick?
"I've told you, it's over. Just hear me out," he pleaded, desperation clear in his voice. "I've been trying to get back on my feet, but it's been hard without you. We can make this work again." I stared at him, incredulous. "You really think I'd come back? After everything you've done? You manipulated me, lied to me, and used me. There's nothing left to fix." Nick's face darkened, a flicker of anger replacing the desperation. "We were married, Justine. That means working through the tough times." "I did work through the tough times, Nick," I snapped. "I worked through them alone, while you partied and spent money you didn't have." A few passers-by slowed, their curious eyes flicking between us as the tension grew. I didn't care. Let the whole world know what I had been through. Nick's posture shifted, his tone turning confrontational. "You want people to think I'm the bad guy? You've been hiding money and living this new life while I'm struggling." "Living this new life isn't easy," I said, trying to stay calm. "But it's necessary. I need peace, Nick, something you can't seem to give me." His eyes narrowed, filled with anger. "You think you're better than me now?" "No, Nick," I said firmly. "I think I deserve better than how you treated me." I turned to walk away, but Nick grabbed my shoulder and spun me around. His grip was tight, and his voice was cold. "This isn't over, Justine. You're not getting rid of me that easily. Get your hands off me," I yelled, my voice loud enough to catch the attention of nearby bystanders. Nick hesitated, his grip loosening, but the venom in his eyes stayed. Before he could respond, a tall man in a suit stepped forward, his expression serious. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, his eyes darting to Nick. "Yes," I said firmly, pulling away from Nick and standing tall. "Thank you," I quickly replied. "I was just leaving." Nick glared at the man but took a step back, his voice low and threatening as he repeated, "This isn't over." Ignoring his parting words, I hurried away, my heart racing. I wouldn't let this encounter scare me. If anything, it strengthened my determination. As soon as I got back to my apartment, I called my lawyer. "Nick is stalking me," I said firmly. "I need to escalate this. What are my options?" "We can file for a restraining order immediately," he replied. "Document today's incident in detail, and we'll proceed." Later that evening, as I filled out the necessary paperwork, a sense of empowerment replaced my fear. For the first time, I felt like I was taking concrete steps to protect my peace and reclaim my life. The next week passed without incident until I got a call from an unknown number. My stomach dropped when I answered and heard Nick's voice. "Justine, you think a piece of paper will stop me? You have no idea what I'm capable of," he hissed before hanging up. Trembling with a mix of fear and anger, I immediately called the police to report the threat, adding it to the growing case against him. This pattern of intimidation and control had to end, and I was determined to see it through. The very next day, Patricia called me with surprising news. "Justine, people are talking," she said, her voice brimming with disbelief. "They know about Nick's behavior. He's losing friends and support left and right." "Good," I replied, feeling a small sense of vindication. "He's finally facing the consequences of his actions." After the call, I stood by the window, looking out at the bustling street below. For the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. Nick's grip on my life was slipping, and the world was starting to see him for who he really was. My journey wasn't over, but I could feel myself reclaiming my future one step at a time. Weeks passed, and life slowly began to feel normal again. My new job was thriving. I found joy in the work and support from my colleagues. Evenings were filled with laughter and encouragement from Patricia, who had become my anchor through it all. One afternoon, I was busy working on a presentation when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Olivier. "Hey, Justine, are you free to meet for coffee later? There's something you should know." Curiosity sparked, and I agreed to meet him. We met at a cozy cafe near my office. Olivier was already there, looking serious. He gestured to the seat across from him as I walked in. "Justine, thanks for meeting me," he said, his tone heavy with concern. "No problem, Olivier. What's going on?" I asked, taking the seat and preparing for whatever news he had to share. I sat down, curious. "What is it, Olivier?" "It's about Nick," he began. "He's not doing well. He's been trying to turn people against you, but it's backfired. People are starting to see him for who he really is." Relief swept over me.
Good.
"He needs to face the consequences of his actions." Olivier hesitated before adding, "There's more. Nick got into trouble with the law, drunk driving. He's lost even more support because of it." I nodded, feeling a mix of satisfaction and pity. "Thanks for telling me, Olivier. I needed to hear that." After our coffee, I decided to take a walk through the park. The cool breeze and the sound of rustling leaves were soothing, and I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't experienced in a long time. That's when I saw him, Nick. He looked disheveled and defeated, sitting alone on a bench. At first, he didn't notice me, but when our eyes met, his expression darkened. "Well, look who it is," he said, his voice dripping with bitterness. "Nick, please." "I don't want any trouble," I replied, keeping my distance. "You've ruined everything for me, Justine," he spat, his face twisted with anger. "You and your lies." "Lies?" I shot back, my voice firm. "Nick, the only person who ruined your life is you. Your actions have consequences." He stumbled closer, his steps unsteady. "Consequences? I've lost everything. My respect, my friends, all because of you." I held my ground.
No, Nick.
"You've lost everything because of your choices. I just chose not to be your victim anymore." For a moment, his anger faltered, and desperation flickered in his eyes. "You think you're free of me?" he sneered. "This isn't over." Before he could say more, four police officers approached. "Mr. Dave," one of them asked. Nick turned to face them, his false bravado crumbling. "Yes?" You're under arrest for violating the restraining order. You are warned to stay away from Miss Miller, the officer said, pulling out handcuffs. Nick's face turned pale. Justine, you can stop this. Tell them it's a mistake, he pleaded, his voice panicked. I shook my head, my voice steady.
No, Nick.
This ends now. The officers led him away, and I stood there watching, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. It was finally over. That evening, I returned to my apartment and found a letter waiting for me in the mail. Opening it, I discovered I had been approved for a promotion at work, a higher position with new opportunities. It felt like a sign from the universe that I was on the right path. I immediately called Patricia to share the good news. She was thrilled, and we decided to celebrate with a small dinner at my place. Together, we toasted to new beginnings and the end of a dark chapter in my life. That night, as I sat quietly reflecting, I thought about how far I had come, from betrayal and heartbreak to rebuilding my life step by step. I had discovered strength I never knew I had, and, for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. I had taken back my life, piece by piece. Walking through the busy streets the next day, I felt lighter, like a heavy weight had finally been lifted off my shoulders. The pain of the past was fading, replaced by a sense of strength and hope. I deserved this new life, a life where my value wasn't tied to someone else's control. As I turned a corner, I spotted someone familiar, Nick. He looked unkempt and defeated, standing outside a convenience store. His eyes were hollow, and it was clear he was struggling. For a brief moment, our eyes met, but there was nothing left between us. No connection, no power. Without a word, I kept walking, my heart steady and my resolve firm. Nick's story was over for me. His downfall was complete, but my story was just beginning. My future was bright, full of promise, and I was ready to embrace it one step at a time.